Israel is heading to elections once again. This is a line that you heard me say way too many times since we started the show. But here we are once again. Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post with me, Ghadi Francis, our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates and stories from West Asia. This week, we talk about how Israel's coalition government has collapsed. Coalition heads Bennett and Lapid have moved to dissolve the parliament. Now, what does this mean? It means that Israel is heading to ballot box for the fifth time in over 3 years. This time, the elections are especially crucial because former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is eyeing a comeback to power.
אני אסייע לו באמצעות חפיפה מסודרת ויסודית כמה זמן שצריך. יש מדינה לנהל.
That was Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid. They were announcing the collapse of the government.
לפיזור הכנסת ולקביעת בחירות במועד מוסכם בימים הקרובים עד לפיזור הכנסת.
What happened next was something that could not have been scripted. As Bennett announced the collapse, lights went out in the hall.
כמה זמן שצריך. יש מדינה לנהל.
כמה סמלי.
When the power came back, Yair Lapid murmured, "How symbolic." This moment has summed up Israeli politics in the last 3 years. Elections and more elections. The coalition government in Israel has collapsed. Israel is heading to its fifth elections in over 3 years.
We spared no efforts to galvanize whomever was needed to pass the regulations, but unfortunately, our efforts bore no fruit. Therefore, my friend, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, and I decided to act together to dissolve Parliament and set an agreed-upon date for elections.
Bennett and Lapid were leading what was Israel's most diverse government in history. But in just over a year, the coalition has run its course. It lost its majority after multiple lawmakers quit the government. The government had a wafer-thin majority to begin with. The Israeli parliament, or Knesset, has a total of 120 seats, so the majority mark is 61. The coalition had 62 seats, so after 3 lawmakers quit, they simply did not have the numbers to sustain. So, the coalition heads decided to dissolve the Knesset.
What has happened in the past few days, what has happened here tonight, is further proof that the Israeli system is in need of serious change and major repairs. A year ago, we started the process of rebuilding, and now we are carrying it on together.
The Israeli coalition government was a mix of 8 parties, spanning from the far right to the far left. It was also the first to ever be backed by an Arab party. But while diversity was its strength, it was also the government's Achilles heel. The coalition got off to a strong start. It passed the first national budget in several years, navigated a pair of coronavirus waves, and even improved relations with the US and Arab allies. Ultimately, ideological differences caused it to unravel. From the start, the coalition focused too much on consensus, thus ignoring diverse topics like the Israeli-Palestine conflict. The Arab Party even called out the government's stance on the Palestine issue. Once the government is dissolved, Lapid will take over. He will be Israel's caretaker prime minister. This is until a new government is sworn in. Lapid will also be the one to greet US President Biden when he visits Israel next month. The elections are likely to take place in October, after all the Jewish holidays. The new vote could set the stage for Netanyahu's return to power. His camp is already courting members of the Knesset. The former Prime Minister has 2 options ahead of him. He can gather enough members and form an alternative government. This could be a win-win situation for all. Israel would not have to go through another election, and Benjamin Netanyahu will be back as Israel's Prime Minister. But if Netanyahu does not have the numbers, Israel will go to the polls again. The coming months present great risk and great opportunity. Once again, Netanyahu's Likud party appears to be the front runner, while Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid could get 20 seats. Lapid is likely to face relentless attacks from Netanyahu, but he will do so from the perch of the Prime Minister's office. Even then, the two sides would still have to cobble up a coalition. So even with elections, a clear majority for either side is highly unlikely. Lapid has to work now at looking prime ministerial. His new post as interim prime minister is his greatest asset going into the election. His only goal right now? To stop Netanyahu from coming back to power. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
From Saudi Arabia to Lebanon, we have a lot more lined up for you in this edition of the West Asia Post. But first, as usual, let's take a look at what else is making the headlines across West Asia.
The United Nations finds that journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was killed by Israeli fire. This comes after Israel refused to open a criminal investigation into her killing. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps replaces its intelligence chief Hossein Tayeb, who held the position for more than 12 years. General Mohammad Kazemi will become the new chief. Lebanese President Michel Aoun meets with Prime Minister-designate Najib Mikati to ask him to form a new government, more than a month after parliamentary elections that yielded no clear majority. Israel's Yair Lapid visits Ankara amid warnings of an Iranian plot to kill or kidnap Israeli tourists on Turkish soil. His visit also comes as Turkey seeks to improve ties with both Israel and Iran. A Turkish drone strike killed 4 Kurdistan Workers' Party members and injured 1 in Iraq's northern province. This is part of the long-running Turkish campaign against Kurdish groups in Iraq. Lebanon's state security agency raided a house belonging to central bank governor Raed Salameh. Salameh was charged with money laundering and corruption earlier this year. He has denied all such charges.
Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is on a regional tour. He first visited Egypt, then Jordan, and lastly Turkey. It has been Salman's first trip outside the Gulf since the 2018 killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Now it comes just before the US President Joe Biden is supposed to visit the region. Is this regional tour a push from MBS to position himself as a de facto leader? In our next report, we tell you all about this.
In politics, there are no permanent friends or enemies, only permanent interests. West Asia is going through some serious realignment. Some old foes are learning to live with each other, and one man is vying for more power in the region. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince is on a regional tour. The stops include Egypt, Jordan, and finally Turkey. This is Mohammed bin Salman's first trip outside the Gulf since the 2018 murder of Jamal Khashoggi. 4 years later, West Asia is letting bygones be bygones. It is a tour aimed at restoring Saudi's regional supremacy. The timing is crucial. This tour comes right before Joe Biden's visit to Riyadh. So the message is simple. West Asia is looking at its own interests and MBS remains a key player. His first stop was Egypt. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi welcomed MBS at the Cairo airport. On the agenda were regional and wider international affairs. Both MBS and Sisi discussed a wide range of issues, including the impact of the Ukraine war and the realignment of Saudi and Egyptian positions. Saudi Arabia has provided wide-ranging financial support to Egypt ever since Sisi came to power. So this trip was no different. The Saudi Sovereign Fund announced investments. 14 deals worth $7.7 billion were signed. Next up, it was a quick stop to Jordan. The Crown Prince held talks with Jordan's King Abdullah. The Jordan leg of the tour was particularly crucial for MBS. In the last few years, Jordan-Saudi relations have been marked by tensions. This is because of two main reasons. One, the Hashemite custodianship of Jerusalem's holy places. And two, Saudi Arabia's alleged role in backing Prince Hamza's coup attempt. So the Crown Prince tried to improve the strained ties and fulfill pledges to help Jordan's struggling economy. This brings us to the most important part of this trip, MBS's visit to Turkey. For years, Saudi Arabia and Turkey have been bitter foes. They've clashed in the past over the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, over the Muslim Brotherhood, and on who will lead the Muslim world. But it looks like the two countries are now burying their hatchet. Why? Because money speaks louder than words. With a struggling economy, Erdogan needs Saudi investments ahead of the 2023 elections. For Saudi Arabia, it's a win-win situation. Turkey has dropped the Khashoggi case and transferred the trial to Saudi Arabia. So Riyadh gets what it always wanted. MBS has long been sidelined on the global stage. But he's finally coming out of the cold thanks to the Ukraine war and the need for oil. This trip was crucial. It helped establish him as the region's de facto leader. Next month's visit by the US President will complete the international rehabilitation of the 36-year-old prince. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
And now to the country that I'm currently standing in. Lebanon is pushing to revive its tourism. The crisis-hit nation is hoping for an influx of tourists and visitors to help its flagging economy. In fact, 12,000 visitors are expected to arrive each day in Beirut for the coming 3 months. Hezbollah actually agreed to remove banners and Sulaimani posters from the airport road. It was after a request by the tourism minister Walid Nassar. We sit down with the man himself to ask how he is helping Beirut to gear up for the tourism this summer. The city of Beirut hides its charm for the night. That's when the nightlife hotspots of the city come to life. The party never stopped in Lebanon's capital. Even when the city was torn apart by a bloody civil war in the last century. Beirut was once known as the jewel of the Mediterranean. Now, it's a city of baffling contradictions. From 1952 to 1975, Beirut was a hub of economic, social, intellectual, and cultural life in West Asia. It is also well connected via a seaport and airport, something that made the city a paradise for businessmen, also for politicians escaping upheavals and military coups. it is still seen as one of the most liberal cities in the Arab world. In the 1970s, the city's French architecture, cuisine, and equal rights for women often sparked comparisons with Paris. Torn apart by a devastating civil war and a crippling economic crisis, Beirut is now trying to push tourism. According to the country's tourism minister, the ailing economy should receive a welcome injection of more than $3 billion, thanks to a rebound in tourist arrivals over the summer. I sat down with Walid Nassar, talking about tourism in Lebanon and what it means for the country's revival. Mr. Minister, let's start with the really most controversial part of what you did. A few years back in the PM Saad Hariri times, there was a big feud in Lebanon over some banners and posters in the southern suburb of Beirut. And it was really something hard to ask for the banners to be removed. It was something ideological, religious. How did you manage to change the frame of arrival to Beirut that easily and that fast?
First of all, I'm happy you're here. And I don't want to, in this subject, remove the billboards related to Hezbollah or any party. I don't want to be arrogant and to say that it's because of my request when I raised this 2 weeks ago, so they respond and they remove it. It's, you know, I believe that it's a win-win situation. So I requested all the parties to remove their whatever are the slogans or related to their parties. And we should not forget that a month ago we were in the middle of the elections. So this, what you are seeing all over Lebanon, it's the result of the elections campaign for all the candidates at that time. We had more than 1,000 candidates, so imagine how many billboards we have. So when I asked, it was in the context, we were talking about Beirut airport.
That was about the road to the airport and the feud about the billboards. Let's speak a little bit about numbers. Usually like millions of dollars and thousands of expats arrive to Lebanon. Would you share some fresh numbers? How's the tourism going and what is expected out of this summer?
That we will host around an average of 12,000 per day, minimum. The average should be, starting next week, 14,000 a day. So from the 14,000, we have 75% from the expats, from our diaspora, 75%, and 25% foreigners. From the 25% foreigners, we have 75% from Europe and the other areas, and 25% from the GCC. And from the Arab world, Iraq, Egypt, and Jordan, they are on the top of the list.
Let me end on an Indian note here to my Indian viewer.
I love India, by the way.
We previously discussed some of your Indian emotions. How would you tell an Indian person to come to Lebanon, and why would they come? I've always seen in social media with WION a lot of love and positive comments from Indian people all around India towards our country and our culture. So how can you tell an Indian person watching this now to come to Lebanon?
I can tell you, our Indian friends, that if you go to the Indian people or expat living in the GCC, and I have a lot of Indian friends working in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Bahrain, I can assure you that all of them, they are waiting for the situation to be more stable. We are now targeting to create airline between India or somewhere close to India to Lebanon, direct flight, not via GCC. And this, it's feasible. It's feasible if we target a cheap or a affordable ticket, the charter, so we can do it. Imagine if we can host per, this is
I'm sure if there was a direct flight, there would be many Indians wanting to come and see our part of
and not only
the
from
East.
India. India could be a hub from the Far East area to have a direct flight to Lebanon.
Paid but failed. This is a hashtag trending across West Asia and the world. It actually talks about Saudi Arabia's Hajj lottery system. It is a system introduced by the kingdom to choose Western pilgrims that would be allowed to perform Hajj pilgrimage this year. But this system itself is actually a failed one, and thousands are expressing their frustration on social media. We tell you more.
The Hajj is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. For Muslims across the world, it's a sacred pilgrimage. A once-in-a-lifetime duty for all able-bodied Muslims, if they can afford to perform the annual pilgrimage. Before the coronavirus pandemic, millions of Muslims would take the Hajj every year. On an average, 2.5 million pilgrims would descend on Mecca, taking part in the 5-day-long rituals. But since 2020, it has been a very different Hajj. This year, 1 million pilgrims are supposed to take part, the biggest number since the pandemic began. So obviously, Muslim pilgrims across the world were hopeful. But a new lottery system has led to utter chaos. Last week, Saudi Arabia announced a Hajj lottery system. Muslims from Europe, Australia and Americas had to apply to attend Hajj. This was a random draw on a government website. All applicants must be under the age of 65. They must have completed 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccination. Those attending must also submit a negative PCR test, taken within 72 hours of travel. Only those who haven't performed Hajj in the last 5 years are allowed to apply. But this Hajj lottery for pilgrims has descended into utter chaos. It has confused worshippers and travel agents alike, especially since the Hajj is just 2 weeks away. First, those who had already booked their travels had to rush for refunds. Then, the website crashed briefly due to high demand. Thirdly, the draw led to more problems. At the beginning of the draw, 3 packages were announced: silver, gold and platinum. All packages included flights, accommodations, domestic transportation and catering. It is for varying lengths of stay and levels of service. But pilgrims say they applied for a different package but have been allocated something else. The other problems here include payments failing, bookings being cancelled after payments were done, and a complete lack of a complaint system. On Twitter, the hashtag paid but failed is also trending. Hosting the Hajj is a matter of prestige for Saudi rulers. They are custodians of Islam's holiest sites. For them, it is their most powerful source of political legitimacy. But with frustration growing across the world, is this lottery system detrimental for the kingdom and its religious soft power? West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from the world's most volatile region. Until then, stay safe. I am Ghadi Francis, coming to you from Beirut, Lebanon, and you're watching WION World is One.